Hello and welcome back to JC's Writing Advice. I'm JC Bybee, indie author, writer coach, and part-time YouTuber. You can find all of my books and my writing coaching services at my website, jcbybee.com. You can also find me on Patreon and support me there, where you can get access to exclusive short stories and deleted scenes from my books. And both of those, my website and my Patreon, will be linked in the description down below. So today, what is today's topic? We are going back to pacing. We talked in general terms about pacing last week, and today we're going to go into a few considerations by very broad genres. We're not going super into specifics on that today, simply because it's a lot to cover. Each genre itself could probably be its own video. I just want to hit the highlights of today. All right. So, pacing by genre, expectations and guidelines. There we go. Wakey. All right. Some things to consider. Like I said, this is not an exhaustive list. We're not going to go through everything. Another thing I want you to consider as you're listening to this is, what kind of story are you telling? Your genre is important, and the conventions of the genre are important. So when you are putting your book together, when you are talking to your editor or writer coach, really take into consideration what kind of story are you telling, and that will inform both genre and pacing. And pacing should change throughout this story. It's not a constant, everything is action-packed or everything is slow and deliberate. Neither of those are true for any genre. So these, like I said, are very broad guidelines for you to follow and consider as you're writing. And be careful with challenging the conventions of genre. If you are shooting for if you're shooting for romance, you really need to, unless, again, things can change and occasionally people can challenge the conventions of a genre. But if you are just starting out or you're struggling with this, try to stay within the conventions of the genre that you are writing in. So what genres am I going to cover today? Again, these are broad genres that cover most everything. If you're telling me some very specific list of words that covers what you're talking about, you're getting too wrapped up in the details. You're probably writing fantasy, to be honest. I say I write superhero procedural. Where is it classified? It's classified under thriller and suspense and fantasy, because for some reason superheroes are classified under fantasy. Whatever. So I write thriller and suspense with a touch of fantasy. I say my genre is superhero procedural. That doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. When I'm writing, I need to take into considerations thriller and suspense for my pacing. All right. And speaking of thriller and suspense, generally speaking, thriller and suspense is faster paced. We can go into mystery and the various types of mysteries there are. They're slower, but not as slow as some people think. Mysteries happen a lot quicker than a lot of people want to say. Because a mystery, you need to keep people interested in the story, engaged in the story, and that usually requires a faster pace. Especially the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story is where things happen quick. You usually start out with some kind of mystery, murder, terror plot, robbery, missing person, whatever. That draws the reader in immediately. And that keeps the pace up. And then once you've got them hooked, you can add in additional scenes to vary the pace. Your chapters are usually shorter. You can take advantage of cliffhangers and frequent action scenes to keep the reader going. Cliffhangers are used all the time in thriller and suspense, TV, movies, books, whatever, because if it's done right, it makes the reader want to keep going because they have to find out what happened. What happens at the end of the cliffhanger? And then frequent action scenes keep the pace up and keep the story flowing quickly. Then to balance those out so it doesn't feel like you're making your reader run a marathon, you can use sort of these deliberate, slow scenes where characters are interacting, where you give a brief description of the location, things of that nature to help the story take a second, give your reader a moment to breathe, and then move forward. Because you don't want to just give action, because it feels exhausting to read. And some of the details can get lost. And if your readers aren't able to pick up on all of the details, they might miss important information, which feels unsatisfying. Next, this is a genre that I have almost no experience with. Going off of lots of research into expectations. So other people might disagree or have a slightly more nuanced take on this, but romance is generally slower paced in the beginning. Doesn't necessarily start off slow. You don't want to start off with a full page description of the main character's house necessarily, but it doesn't have to start off with a murder, for example. Your initial focus is going to be on character development, and especially how your protagonists connect. Why do we care about their love story? What makes it interesting? What makes them interesting? Some of the older examples in the genre, Pride and Prejudice. There's the conflict between the various characters and their personalities, Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy, and how they develop as characters and how their connection starts and how it grows is a big part of the story, on top of all of the other things that Jane Austen is so good at doing. As the story progresses, that's when you pick up your pace. And you do that by adding in conflicts and dramatic events. Those conflicts can be the cliche misunderstanding that drives the protagonists apart. It can be a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing where their families don't like what's going on. There are lots of examples of how to add conflict into a romance novel. But again, I'm going to say I'm not an expert in this one. I have not yet tried my hand at romance. I don't know that I will. It's not something I have experience with, writing-wise. So, again, read your genre, study up on the tropes, and go from there. Next, another one I'm not real familiar with is literary fiction. So, literary fiction covers a huge number of books. So, the pacing is deliberate and varied. You have lengthy descriptions, internal monologues, and philosophical reflection. All of those can be very slow and very deliberate. If you feel like it's getting too bogged down, you can add in these action beats followed by quieter moments that give, in the same way as with thriller and suspense, that give the reader a moment to breathe, to take a second and say, Okay, we're out of this. We're out of the description now. Something's really serious happening, and then we have a moment to breathe, and we're back into the concepts. Again, I'm not speaking from a whole lot of expertise on literary fiction. Read the genre, read the books of the genre, get a feel for how they pace things, respond accordingly. Next is science fiction. Now, science fiction is a fun one because you have one question to answer first. Is this hard science fiction or soft science fiction? And if it's hard science fiction, you've got different expectations than soft science fiction. Soft science fiction deals more philosophical. Hard science fiction deals more with hard science or the ramifications of hard science or where science could potentially go based off of current knowledge. You're kind of extrapolating. And that determines whether or not you're going fast or slow. If you want to keep people hooked in, if you want to explore certain topics, it's all about the plot. This one is one that's really driven by your plot, what kind of story you're trying to tell. And then a way you can vary your pace, adjust it accordingly, is use your world building. You know, are we talking near future Earth? Are we talking far future space exploration? Are we talking, well, one that is going to be probably showing up a lot is the ramifications of people using large language models, or as they're often misnamed, AI. Large language models and their ability to create things based off of the prompts that they're given is something that people are talking a lot about. And that could be an interesting topic, but you have to build your world around how did that develop? Where did it go? What did we do with it? But again, your pacing is going to vary, just like with any genre. You've really got to ask yourself that first question, though. Are you doing hard science fiction or soft science fiction? And base it according to what you've found in those two very broad subgenres of science fiction. And then last but not least, fantasy. Now, fantasy has some very big subgenres. Epic fantasy, dark fantasy, portal fantasy. So you need to consider your subgenre. But in general, fantasy has a slightly slower beginning. A lot of them can start in medias res or in the middle of some action beat that hooks the reader. But then we go into world building and character relationships. So you hook them real quick, but then you slow the pace down. If you do that, you don't want to slow the pace down too much, though, or spend too much time, because then you lose the importance of the hook. You have a faster middle to climax with fantasy. You've developed the characters, you've developed the world, you've developed the plot, and then things speed up as you get toward whatever climax you're shooting for. And then action and character moments to vary your pace. Just like with everything, your action beats speed things up. Your character moments slow things down. You want to use these judiciously to maintain interest in your story. Otherwise people are going to lose interest. You can tell a great story, but if it's paced wrong, people aren't going to enjoy it. All right, some final thoughts. Your pacing needs to be deliberate. You need to understand, why am I going fast here? Why is it going slow here? How much action have I used? How much character moments have I used? How much description have I used? That way there is a natural ebb and flow and rhythm to what you're writing. And again, within the conventions of the genre, literary fiction, you don't want to have a whole bunch of action in these long, deliberate dialogue scenes, because that is not going to be a smooth reading experience for your reader. And in the same with, thriller. If I start out wrong with the wrong kind of setup, then it doesn't matter how well I tell the rest of the story. I've lost my reader because it didn't start off fast enough for somebody who's interested in that genre. Because again, when somebody picks up a James Patterson novel, they're expecting something. When somebody picks up a Brandon Sanderson novel, they're expecting something. When somebody picks up something in the romance genre, sorry, I don't know any specific writers there, I apologize, they have expectations. And you want to meet your reader's expectations first. And then you can work on, I don't want to say subverting expectations, because that's become a crutch that people rely on to overcome bad storytelling. They think it's clever, so they do it because it's clever, not because they're trying to do anything with it. That goes into the idea of be careful. Genres have expectations. People have expectations of genres. If you are going to attempt to toy with the expectations or subvert the expectations, you need to be careful with how you do it, because it has to feel satisfying to the reader. If it doesn't feel satisfying to the reader, they're not going to like it. And if they don't like it, they're either going to put the book down and not finish it, not recommend it, so on and so forth. But again, I'm not saying you can't do these things. I'm just saying make sure that if you're going to do them, it has a purpose and you do it well. That's where an editor, a writer's group, a writer coach can all come in and say, I see where you're going. It's not working because of this. Here's how you could potentially do it. Or this is working, maybe adjust it to where it works a little bit better. And then last but not least, have fun. Enjoy the process of writing whatever book you're writing. And work out the details in your second draft or third draft. I'm not going to say go up to as many drafts as some people do, because some people overdraft. They do way too much and way too much work, and it stops becoming fun. They're seeking a perfect level of perfection probably never going to obtain. So that wraps up my little talk on genre and pacing. If you've liked what you've heard, please feel free to give it a like. Share this with people that might be interested, with your friends, other writers. And then if you have questions that you might want me to answer, comments about future episodes, potentially, please feel free to put them down below in the comments. As always, please remain respectful. And that wraps it up. Thanks for stopping by. Remember, jcbybee.com for my books and author coaching services, and patreon.com patreon.com/jcbybee for exclusive short stories and deleted scenes. Thank you for stopping by, and I hope you have an awesome day.